Tar-Aldarion, for so he is called in all tales, grew swiftly to a man of great stature, strong and vigorous in mind and body, golden-haired as his mother, ready to mirth and generous, but prouder than his father, and ever more bent on his own will. From the first, he loved the sea, and his mind was turned to the craft of shipbuilding. He had little liking for the North Country, and spent all the time that his father would grant by the shores of the sea, especially near Ravenna, where was the chief haven of Númenor, the greatest shipyards, and the most skilled shipwrights. Hello Tolkien geeks! This video is part of my playlist series on the island state of Númenor, the great superpower of Middle-earth's Second Age. Make sure to like the video and please do subscribe to Voice of Geekdom if you've not already done so. Tar-Aldarion and Erendis, the Mariner's Wife, is a half-finished short story set in Númenor, which was first published in 1980's Unfinished Tales. This is the tale of Tar-Aldarion, the Sixth King of Númenor. This story is close to unique to the Legendarium, in that it is a highly personal story about failed love, about a marriage about which it can only be said that it would have been kinder if these two people had never even met. The latter section of this story is told only in note form, and much of it concerns Aldarion's daughter, who becomes the first ruling queen, Tar-Meneldur, who shall be the subject of a forthcoming video in this series. More on that later. Tar-Aldarion was born Anardil, son of Tar-Meneldur, in the year 700 of the Second Age. His mother was Almarien, who was the daughter of Vëantur, the famous captain of the king's ships who had first sailed back to mainland Middle-earth during the reign of Tar-Aldarion, Aldarion's grandfather. When Tar-Aldarion came of age at 25, Vëantur offered to allow Tar-Aldarion to accompany him on one final return voyage to Lindon aboard the Númenor, his great golden-sailed ship, which was the nautical marvel of that generation. After his father reluctantly agreed to the trip, with a sense of foreboding, one might add, Tar-Aldarion and Vëantur successfully reached Mithlond, better known to many of you as the Grey Havens, and there befriended Gil-galad and Círdan the shipwright. He may not have known it then, but this encounter was to shape his entire life. Upon their return, the future king found his son profoundly changed by the experience. He was strangely distant and thoughtful. The phenomenon of sea longing is a prominent theme in many of Tolkien's works. Some of you may have seen that I talked about this in a recent podcast on the channel. Arguably the most prominent example is that of the First Age hero Tuor, father of Erendil, who is struck by the longing for the sea when he meets Ulmo, the Lord of Waters and mighty Valar of the Oceans. The Silmarillion describes and characterises the state of sea longing as an echo of the music of the Ainur preserved in the sound of water, the song of creation which gave birth to the universe of Tolkien's mythology. Tar-Aldarion had become enamoured of the great sea and of a ship riding there alone without sight of land, borne by the winds with foam at its throat, to coasts and havens unguessed, and that love and desire never left him until his life's end. Tar-Aldarion has a love of the adventure, mystery and romance of the sea, and when he sails he looks east to Middle-earth, not west to Valinor as Tuor did. Soon after this first voyage of Tar-Aldarion, Vëantur retired from sailing for good, and gave Númenor to his grandson as a gift. Aldarion would sail aboard his grandfather's old ship twice more, a voyage of 3 years, immediately followed by another voyage of 4 years exploring the coastland southwards, as far as the Bay of Belfalas. The following year, Meneldur took over the rulership of Númenor, when his father relinquished the sceptre, as was customary for Númenorian kings. But the new king Tar-Meneldur was disquieted by his son's passion for sailing and exploring. His concern was that his son's voyaging threatened to disturb the peaceful and idyllic state of Númenorian society, inspiring a more expansionist outlook in future generations. This is interesting. It sets up the central conflict between father and son in the story, but more than that, it presents us with an opportunity to look at this tale as a moment in history. The Númenorians are going to colonize large parts of Middle-earth in the future, and we shall see how, as well-intentioned as he was in some ways, you can make the argument that Aldarion's reign was the catalyst which began Númenor's shift from being a land of peace and prosperity for the descendants of the First Age Edain to becoming the empire which it grows into, and eventually setting up the later conquerors and despots who take the sceptre in the days after the shadow falls on Númenor. I've talked before about the shadow falling on Númenor. This story isn't that. We're still much too early for that. But one of the undercurrent themes of this tale, in this brief glimpse at what Númenorian society was really like, are the ways in which the weaknesses that Sauron was able to utilise to corrupt the Númenorians were already present in the culture of this people to begin with. Aldarion does return often to Númenor over the next decade or so, but in that time his sea longing only becomes more ambitious and organised, and he continues to sail east. Aldarion founds the Guild of Venturers in the year 750 of the Second Age, which incidentally is the same year that the realm of Eregion is founded in Middle-earth by the Noldor. The Venturers were made up of the best and most enthusiastic mariners of Aldarion's generation. The men of the Guild of Venturers celebrated the achievements and leadership of the Crown Prince, giving him the title the Great Captain. Aldarion constructs a new ship using the knowledge that he had gleaned from Círdan on his early voyages to Middle-earth, and builds a guild house aboard the enormous Eambur, even living aboard himself whenever he was in Númenor. As well as this new floating headquarters, the guild enlarged the Númenorian fleet considerably during this period, bringing new riches to the island. But tensions continue to rise between Tar-Meneldur and his young and intrepid heir, when the king decides to draft new laws curbing the deforestation of Númenor for the purposes of shipbuilding, protecting the forests of the island, mostly located in the Forostar, from the axes of Aldarion's shipbuilders. Aldarion responds to this by establishing a haven of his own at the estuary of the river Gwathlo, or Grey Flood, the first beachhead of the Númenorians on the mainland, and a place for him to procure timber from the forests of Middle-earth. Vinya Londe, which is New Haven, will last well into the latter days of Númenor, when it will be renamed Lond Daer Eneth, or Great Middle Haven, following the establishment of additional outposts in the south in later centuries. At the end of the 8th century of the Second Age, Meneldur called his son to Armenelos, and the two were reconciled for a time. Aldarion was formally named heir to the throne of Númenor and lord of the ships and havens in the year 800. At the feast of celebration which followed, amongst the many who came to the capital for the festivities was Beregar from Andustar, with his daughter Erendis, who were descendants of the house of Beor, who had served Finrod Felagund and the house of Finarfin during the wars of Beleriand. At the celebration to mark Aldarion's appointment as the heir to the sceptre, the Lady Erendis was immediately struck by Aldarion's beauty and lordly grace. But in the days that followed, Aldarion was busy with affairs of state, particularly the pressing issue, as he saw it, of forestry and the continued procurement of timber for his shipyards, and he paid her little heed at first. When 6 more years had passed, Aldarion once more sought to leave the island to attend to his ambitions in Middle-earth, and indulge his love of the sea. He was given reluctant leave by the king, and Erendis, having found the favour of the queen, dismissed all potential suitors, while Aldarion was abroad for another 7 years. Although all the Númenóreans were blessed with longer than average life, the line of Elros were given the longest lives of all, and Erendis was not of the line of Elros. This meant that, although Aldarion was 71 years Erendis' senior, she had much less time with which to wait around to marry, and to give Aldarion children. After Aldarion returns from his latest 7-year voyage, Meneldur impresses this exact point on his son, who takes his long life for granted, again obsessing over his need to sail further and to see more of Middle-earth. During this period, Aldarion does begin to court the Lady Erendis, in between attending to the obviously more important matter of the construction of his new flagship, Palaran, which means the Far Wanderer, but Aldarion takes no steps towards any further commitment, and his relationship with his father becomes more complicated once again when, after 6 years had passed, he demands leave to return to Middle-earth. This time, only the Queen's intervention causes Meneldur to stop short of forbidding his heir from leaving the island entirely, but he does prevent Aldarion's mother and sisters from visiting him before he departs. There is a tradition amongst the Númenóreans that when ships leave the island, they carry a branch from the Oyalaire tree, which is one of the several varieties of fragrant trees which were brought to the island by the visiting elves from the west. The green bough of return was a good luck charm which was bestowed upon departing vessels by the family of the ship's captain as a symbol of friendship between the two Maiar of the sea, Uenen and Osse. When Aldarion vowed to cast off without the bow of return, and Erendis heard of it, she spoke to the queen and offered to carry it to Aldarion herself before he could leave. When she arrived and presented the bow of return, telling Aldarion that she came from the queen, Aldarion was amazed, and here the text tells us that at that time Aldarion first looked on Erendis with love. It is rather telling that only Erendis' support of him in this moment results in his truly noticing her for the first time. Aldarion feels a coldness from his father which ostracizes him, and Erendis understands this and pities him. This time Aldarion was not gone as long as during earlier voyages, and hurrying back to Númenor, he brought with him a diamond as a gift for Erendis. When the king saw this, he responded again with dismay, and urged Aldarion to give serious thought to finding a wife for himself. But Meneldur's insistence on Aldarion's duty of marriage backfires, and the two of them quarrel. Aldarion leaves the island again in open defiance of the king, who rescinds Aldarion's authority and closes the shipyards of Romenna. Aldarion returns after 5 years have passed for repairs and provisions, and then, seeing the results of his rebellion against his father, immediately departs again in disgust. This time he is gone for much, much longer, sailing far into the south into uncharted waters, and the king and the people of Númenor begin to think Aldarion dead or vanished forever. Erendis leaves Ar-Menellos, returning to her home in the west of the island. When Aldarion finally returns in the year 843, Meneldur is relieved and remorseful of their quarrelling at their previous meeting, and he restores Aldarion's authority as Lord of the Ships and Havens, and also bestows the new title of Master of Forests. As Aldarion begins to go about his new job of tending to the forestry of Númenor, he looks to set to rights everything that he had neglected in his absence. One day, while riding in the woods of the Andustar, Aldarion encounters a dark-haired woman alone, mistaking her for a visiting elf, not an uncommon sight in the Westlands. But as he draws nearer, he recognises Erendis by the jewel which he had given her at their last meeting, over 2 decades ago. He falls in love with her again in this moment. The two of them ride back together to her father, where Aldarion declares his intention to marry her. After all this time, and Aldarion's blowing hot and cold for so long, and his long absences, Erendis has some understandable doubts. A change comes over Aldarion at this time, and he seems to realise that it is now or never for him to commit fully to his courtship of Erendis. He neglects the shipyards and ceases his procurement of new timber for the ships of the venturers. But while his priorities have shifted during this period, he still has the sea and the Lady Uinen in his heart, which is shown when he invites Erendis to accompany him on a voyage around the coast of the island, aboard Eambur, while his guild of venturers were celebrating their centenary. Erendis conceals her distaste for the sea in general during their brief cruise together. Feasts were held all around the island, at every haven, and Aldarion and Erendis sailed together to Andunie in her homeland in the west. There Vëantur, the founder of the line of the Lords of Andunie, held a great feast in Aldarion's honour. This voyage, and Vëantur's toast to Erendis, naming her Uineniel, daughter of Uinen, makes Erendis uncomfortable enough that her doubts about marrying Aldarion return. And he doesn't help matters when he leaves her alone and begins to see to his various duties again. Notably, at this time, he builds a tower on top of the island of Tol Uinen, off the coast of Romenna, the Calmindon, or Light Tower. When these constructions were completed, he returned to Erendis, who asked that he should journey with her by land around the island, just as she had agreed to see Númenor with him aboard Eambur. As they journeyed through the land of Emerie, south of the Meneltarma, their differences became more and more apparent. Erendis' love of the trees, and Aldarion's love of, well, chopping them down to build ships. They part ways again, and Erendis is more confused than ever. In the spring of that year, the two of them observe the prayer of the Erukjörme together, when the ruling monarch would ascend the Meneltarma, followed by a silent crowd, and at the summit offer a prayer to Eru for the year ahead. The 3 annual ceremonies of prayer in Númenor, atop the summit of the Meneltarma, are one of the very few depictions of explicit religious practices being observed in Tolkien's Legendarium. After the ceremony, Erendis and Aldarion speak together, and she agrees to accept his marriage proposal. When the couple return from the mountain summit, Tar-Aldarion finally presents Erendis to his father as his betrothed, and the king gave to her a gift of a white house in Emerie, just as she had discussed with Tar-Aldarion in their journey together through that region. "Here I could be at ease," she had said. Another 3 years pass, and still Tar-Aldarion and Erendis have yet to set a date for their wedding. One day, Tar-Aldarion is travelling from Andunier in the west of the island by road to seek out the house of Beregar, Erendis' father, when he comes to the top of the cliff overlooking the ocean above the city. And as he looks out into the west, his long-suppressed sea longing takes a hold of him once again. Later, when he arrives at the house of Beregar, Erendis greets him warmly. But as the days pass by, she begins to recognise the wanderlust in his eyes, that look she has seen before so many times already, and his mood fills her with foreboding. And still he does not speak to her of the wedding, or of the war in his heart, being torn between his duties in his homeland, his love for Erendis, and his role as the great captain of the Guild of Venturers. Tar-Aldarion is perhaps not the best communicator when it comes to matters of the heart, to put it mildly. Later that year, Meneldur speaks to Tar-Aldarion of his tardiness in setting a date to wed the Lady Erendis, and once again the two of them quarrel when Tar-Aldarion confides in his father his wish to sail to the Middle-earth mainland again. 18 years he had been ashore, a long time, and he argues that for 12 of those years he had been more than eager to marry, and Erendis it was who had held back. Meneldur had obviously feared this, and although he has pity for his son, he echoes the words of Erendis in Emerie, when he tells him that he cannot wed the sea, for you are affianced to Erendis. Erendis had likewise told him that she would not compete for his affections with Uinen, the Lady of the Sea, and he wrongly takes this as evidence of conspiracy between his father and his bride-to-be. Of course, we know that Tar-Aldarion's mother and Erendis' mother had been in contact, and we know that between them they had contrived to bring about this union, so perhaps on some level there is something behind his paranoia. But Tar-Aldarion reaches the wrong conclusion here and reacts angrily, when he would really do well to listen closely to what his father is telling him. Soon after, he speaks to Erendis again, and informs her of his intention to leave Númenor for a time. Predictably, she is upset and grieved by this, and seeing her reaction, he thinks twice. He offers to marry her that same year, before leaving, and proposes that she accompany him on his forthcoming journey, offering to fit out such a ship as the Venturers made never yet, a queen's house on the water. Erendis is saddened, and refuses his offer, saying, "If for love of you I took ship, I should not return. It is beyond my strength to endure, and out of sight of land I should die. The sea hates me, and now it is revenged that I kept you from it, and yet fled from you." Despite her grief, disappointment, and regrets at feeling unable to accompany her betrothed, Erendis attends the departure of the Venturers, and brings Tar-Aldarion the bow of return once more, bidding him to hurry back as soon as he is able. Over 6 years pass before Tar-Aldarion returns from this latest voyage. The story tells of his return to Vinyalonde, where he found the haven he had built there abandoned and derelict, and the men of Middle-earth had become frightened or hostile. And then we get the line, "Tar-Aldarion heard rumours of some lord in Middle-earth who hated the men of the ships." The year is 869 of the Second Age, still over a century before Sauron begins building Barad-dûr. But the first effects of his growing darkness are beginning to be felt here. We'll get more on this later in the story, but we'll be covering that topic in a future video. Aldarion mistakes the rumours of Sauron for merely an evil human, much as the Free Peoples will mistake him for a Nazgul or an evil sorcerer in his guise as the Necromancer during the Third Age. On his return journey, Aldarion had to deal with extreme winds from the south that forced him off course, and he ended up far in the frozen north, and there the bough of the Oialaire tree, which Erendis had bestowed upon Palaran's departure, withered and perished in the cold. Aldarion finds himself almost a social pariah in his homeland on account of his treatment of Erendis. Even his mother seems to be aggrieved, and the tone here in the narrative seems to suggest that he believes himself deserving of whatever condemnation comes his way. When he speaks to Erendis, well, this is the moment. He tells her of his travels and of the problematic journey home, and finally tells of the unfortunate fate of the Green Bough of Return, while returning from the north. She speaks of his offer from before he left, for her to accompany him on his travels, and, perhaps a little wryly, suggests that she would have fared even worse than the frozen branch of the Oialaire tree. "Your green bough did not go into the bitter cold by will," he answered. "But dismiss me now, if you will, and I think that men will not blame you. Yet dare I not to hope that your love will prove stronger to endure, even than fair Oialaire?" "So it does prove indeed," said Erendis. "It is not yet chilled to the death, Aldarion. Alas, how can I dismiss you, when I look on you again returning as fair as the sun after winter?" "Then let spring and summer now begin," he said. "And let not winter return," said Erendis. The two of them are married, finally, the very next spring in the year 870. There's an amusing moment in the story when the elves of Tol Eressëa show up to the wedding, aboard a spectacular white ship with silver sails, which Aldarion completely fanboys over, of course. And then he commits a bit of a faux pas when they bring a gift of a sapling tree from Elvenhome. "I thank you," said Aldarion to the elves. "The wood of such a tree must be precious indeed." "Maybe, we know not," said they. "None has ever been hewn. It bears cool leaves in the summer and flowers in winter. It is for this that we prize it." Aldarion and Erendis' daughter Ancalime was born 3 years later, and will be the chief subject of my next video in this continued exploration of the Númenor storyline. I should expect at least 2 more videos on the story of Aldarion and Erendis in this series, as there is quite a lot of content to explain with respect to the end of the story.